Okay, so welcome everybody to our third day of the Future Forum. Today I'm gonna introduce rather than Renato, so you should put up with that. I think it's a great it's a great pleasure to introduce this session, which I want to emphasize. I mean, we have great speaker over these 5 days. But what I'm particularly proud of is that this session was the first one to be filled out in term of people booking it, because it demonstrates it's a theme, is a subject that really interests people. So, like, of course we're gonna have Zygmunt Bauman, Serge Latouche this evening, but the fact that young scholars can attract so many people for a topic which is of vital importance for our society is, in my opinion, a good indication of the fact that it was right to put up this session. And to discuss it here. For what concern our speakers, we will have an introduction and a discussion of the topic from Tuukka Toivonen, which is a senior lecturer, which in Italy means pretty much being an associate professor at University College London. Tuukka is not only a great scholar on social innovation, but is also a great friend. We were together, PhD students at the University of Oxford for a few years. And as you will see, Tuukka is a very engaging speaker, and he will have a lot of interesting things to say. But to me, he's also a great human being, and I can never forget the evening spent in our office playing guitar and trying to finish off our thesis. No, but I mean, so Tuukka has also this incredible creative side that it will show. I mean, it's not a random coincidence that a person like Tuukka is interested about innovation in society, because Tuukka is not the kind of dusty academic you might expect in certain universities. Actually a person who is really engaging and really able to discuss with different audiences. But you will see that by yourself. Tuukka has a very an incredible journey in terms of intellectual development. Is first of all a great expert of Japan. Is an expert of welfare state policies and social policies. Is an expert of social entrepreneurship and innovation, which is currently working on, and has been extensively traveling across the world to discuss these issues: United States, Japan, Europe, and is originally Finnish. We all love people from Nordic countries because of the great social model they have built, which used to be a great model for everybody. And then we have Francesco Grisolia, which comes from the opposite side of Europe, namely from Calabria, and is a researcher at University Magna Grecia of Catanzaro. And also Francesco is an expert on innovation. You will see probably Francesco has a more critical take on it, and that's the reason why we put up the debate. I mean, for people who have been at previous meetings, you can see that we're trying to invite people with different points of view, trying to making them dialogue as much as possible. And Francesco will interact with Tuukka, so we'll try to make a bridge between what Tuukka is going to say and the questions are going to come from you. And Francesco, of course, has been working at Oxford as well, so it's part of the network that we try to brought here in Udine. One thing that I would like to tell you, and I will probably repeat that before we talk, Tuukka doesn't speak Italian, and so this put pressure on us on the way we're gonna ask questions to him. Like in Italy, we have the attitude to do not directly ask questions, but first make an introduction and then ask questions. Considering we would have to translate for Tuukka, so Francesco would have to translate the questions, I will really ask you, if we give ourselves a rule in order to take as many questions as possible and to be as clear as possible with Tuukka, that we give us the time of 1 minute for each intervention from the public, and really trying to formulate a question, like a real straight question, in order to facilitate the work of Francesco and then the ability of Tuukka to reply. And Tuukka, it's again a great pleasure, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much to Dr. Ferragina for the flattering introduction. I'm extremely pleased to be here, and for starters, I have to repeat what he just said, that I don't speak Italian. So that's significant for starters, because if you don't like this talk, you can say anything about it very freely in Italian, and I will not understand. It will not be interpreted. But at the same time, so we have great interpretation today, I hear. So everything and everyone will be fine, but at the same time, I will do my best to speak quite slowly, quite clearly, so that, because I know most of you speak English, you'll be able to then understand without interpretation, I think. And as with any presentation, there will be points that are maybe hard to grasp, hard to understand at first. So just write down your questions, and then you can seek for clarification later on when we have this discussion with Francesco. Then we can clarify things that may not be so easy to understand right away. I should say thanks also to President Pozzo and Mr. Renato Qualia, who is not here at this moment, but who will join us a bit later. So thanks for inviting me here to the FutureForum, and it's impressive to be in such a historic city like Udine that also thinks about the next 20 years, the next 30 years, maybe the next 100 years, and so forth. So, okay, so that's my main introduction. But to kick off, I would like to ask you a question. Very simple question. If you're a young person, how would you go about changing the economy? That's my simple question. How would you do it? What would be the methods? If you're a young person now, maybe aged 15 or 18 or 25, how would you change the economy? So please reflect on that for 5 seconds or 10 seconds. So today I'm making one argument about this issue, about how to change the economy, and my main point or argument is that youth enterprise, as you can see, that's my main topic. So youth enterprise presents new opportunities for democratic participation among young people, young adults in Europe and elsewhere. And by this I mean that more young people are able to change our economic culture by remixing it. They're able to take different bits of this lived reality, society and economy. They're able to remix it and then also implement some of that. So that's my main argument, and I really believe that if we generate new supportive infrastructures, new supportive architectures, we can actually inspire more young people to transform our societies into much more sustainable entities for the future. So that's the essence, the core of what I will say today, and I really hope to inspire a good discussion later on about these points. And I also think that we'll have something to say today about new economic models for the future, and we'll also have something to say about sustainability. But let's kick off. Let's start the proper presentation now with the all too familiar story, and this is something you've probably heard about yesterday and on Monday as well, that the road seems to be closed to more and more young people, and I mean here the road to employment, the road to opportunity, the road to influence, the road to positive participation in society. So this is the bleak and worrying reality that we must face at this point. And just to sort of give a bit more content to this, or explain a bit more, of course we have the issue of youth unemployment. So these are the kinds of figures, the kinds of numbers you see in Southern Europe. Youth unemployment is now over 40% in Italy, Spain, and Greece. It's high in the EU in general. Not very encouraging news to hear on a Wednesday morning, but this is what is happening. Unfortunately, youth unemployment is not very low in the UK either, and it's not low in Finland, where I'm from, either. It is a massive, massive problem with a lot of destructive consequences, because, yeah, okay, it may be about losing your salary for a month or two, but it may have some long-term consequences too. So if you're unemployed now, that may make it more sort of difficult for you to have a good job 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line. It may be harder for you to emerge as a leader. So that's a big problem. But at the same time, we have something called non-standard employment. I know Manu likes to talk about this, and all of us like to talk about this, that when there is a new job, when there is a new job opening, and you're invited to apply for a job, it's often going to be temporary, or it's unstable, or it's not going to give you, a career for 5 years, or 10 years, maybe 6 months or less, or it may be unpaid completely. So what's happening in London, for instance, is that there are tens of thousands of interns, young people who are asked to come in for half a year or 9 months to do real work, but they're not paid for that because they're interning. So they're sort of learning the job, whether it's in a service occupation or in the knowledge economy, for a human rights organization, or for an educational organization. You're interning and you might be working without a salary. That may be a really big barrier, because if you don't have some extra money, you will not be able to survive in London for more than 1 or 2 months. So therefore, if you don't have rich parents, you will not be able to be an intern. And if you're not an intern, you can't get a better job afterwards. So some people say that is a massive cause of inequality. Then we have the famous or infamous problem of needs. Youth who are not in education, employment, or training. How many of you have heard this term? Have you ever heard this term? Maybe there's an Italian equivalent. Okay, needs. This was very famous and all over the media in Japan when I studied youth unemployment there about 7, 8 years ago. And this is also quite massive, because needs, this category, this points to youth who are very inactive, so they're not included in any kind of activity when being surveyed. So quite worrying. Tomorrow, I believe, we'll hear from Guy Standing on the precariat, which he says is a new class of these more marginalized people who may be politically dangerous. I'm not sure if all these young people form one coherent class. They are quite diverse in terms of their ethnic backgrounds, in terms of their educations, in terms of their abilities perhaps, in terms of their aspirations. But anyways, we're talking about similar things here. On to the next point, which is a bit less obvious. So we all know that there's unemployment, but the irony is that those people who have jobs, well, they're not very happy either. They're not very engaged. They're not very satisfied with their jobs, even though they may be in a safer position. So they may have a good job, good post. They have money. They get a flat and so forth. They can live properly, but they're not enjoying it. Why is that? Because millennials, young people born after about 1983, they want to work for organizations that foster innovative thinking and develop their skills and make a positive contribution to society. So for today's young people, it's not enough to just have income. Many of you seem to want more, and I want to ask you later on if this is true or not, because this is based on a survey of about 7,800 working young people around the world by Deloitte. So this doesn't represent everybody, but it's based on youth coming from, I think, about 40 countries or so. So the problem here is that only about half of these youth who were surveyed by Deloitte say that their organizations really truly encourage new ways of doing things or reward them for innovative ideas. So just to summarize, about half of young people feel that their workplaces, their organizations are not innovative. They're not open. They don't want to be influenced by youth. To me, this is sort of the bigger irony, the larger irony compared to unemployment. So even if you do get your job, your parents will tell you you're lucky, you should be happy, but that may not be the whole truth. You may end up stuck and you feel that you're at the bottom of the hierarchy, bottom of the age hierarchy as well, and you have all these wonderful ideas about how to design a new product or adapt your organization, make it more efficient, make it more fun, but nobody's listening. That may be the sad truth there. So this happens. So disengagement, probably sleep at work, like many Japanese young people end up doing, and you may feel that you want to move on, you want to do something else. Now, there is a sense of youth being increasingly excluded from decision making and influence. To me, this is sort of the main inspiration for today's talk, that youth are not just excluded from basic jobs and euros, but they're also excluded from having an influence. And that, personally, I feel is a problem from a democratic and well-being and sustainability perspective. Because young people can be positive shapers of all these things. They can be. They're not always allowed to do it. I think this is a tragedy because there's little evidence that young people do not wish to actively shape economic environments. And the surveys that I've seen suggest that, the opposite is true. Young people actually are really motivated to work and to influence and to change things. Considering that we're living through a time of change, this may be disastrous, because often young people are the ones most connected to new technology and those who are most worried about the planet and worried about obviously pressing issues like immigration, like education, the future of your cities, like Udine as well. So we do have a massive problem here, and that's basically the introduction to my talk today. That there is a problem and we need to consider it. And I'm afraid today there's no way I can provide a full answer or full response or full solution to this problem, but I will start with you to think about it. What are the alternatives? What can you do if you're more or less excluded from permanent labor? You can't work for a large corporation like Google or Apple or even a local office or city hall. What are the current alternatives? But one, of course, increasingly is freelancing, right? You become some sort of a freelancer. You're a skilled writer, or you're an artist, or you have good statistical skills. You do jobs for various companies and clients. So that's one opportunity. You will not have a workplace community, right? So you will be working alone, maybe in a loose kind of network. You will not be able to influence a large organization. So what you can do is participate online through Twitter or Facebook or various discussion forums and so forth. So there are things you can do and ways you can influence stuff. There are many petition websites, and if you want to veto a law or maybe you want to advocate for better employment opportunities, you can do so on social media and so forth. So that's one alternative there. A second one, of course, and this is the one I want to talk about, is entrepreneurship. Launching a startup or perhaps joining a startup as well. Okay, so let's think about entrepreneurship a little bit. The first surprising thing is that there is a very high degree of interest in entrepreneurship among young people in Europe. So this doesn't mean all of these youth will actually launch startups, but there is a huge amount of interest. So this survey by the European Commission from 2009 showed that about 40% of those aged 15 to 24, and I think many of you are in this category, would actually find it very or quite feasible to start an enterprise. Very or quite feasible. They feel it's possible. They feel it's quite possible for them to become an entrepreneur. And that's a large figure. Immediately, some of you, including Francesco, will ask, is this really for everyone? You know, starting an enterprise sounds risky and it's hard and it's going to be unstable and take some special skills. Is it for everyone? And is it a basis for universal security? Guys standing tomorrow might might tell us that entrepreneurship is just a neoliberal scheme. It will never be a basis for security. And I would say at the outset that they are right. It would be dubious or strange to claim otherwise. You know, entrepreneurship will not save the day. It will not transform everything, or it will not give us security. It's not really a perfect alternative to stable employment. But nevertheless, I would like to argue that it's increasingly significant. But we need a new way to think about it. We need a new way to understand it and to kind of get to its core and to really understand why it's so important. And here's my argument once again. I would like to convince you today, or at least I would like to start a discussion around this idea that youth enterprise is a new form of democratic participation in society, democratic participation in the economy, and that's why I believe it's so significant potentially. Again, sounds a bit abstract, right? Sounds a little bit abstract. It's pretty hard to grasp what I mean by that. So I'd like to give you a few examples from London. And that's where I'm based. I've been based in London for about 2.5 years. I've been quite busy with teaching, to be honest, but I've had a chance to meet about a dozen young entrepreneurs, and I've become familiar with their basic models, and I intend to research these models more systematically in the future. But let's start with Dominic Potter, who is pictured here in a LinkedIn photograph, which is a photograph of broadcast of the BBC. He was 24 when he launched his enterprise, which was called Internocracy, very difficult to pronounce, Internocracy, an internships organization. Why did he start that? Well, essentially because he saw that there were tens of thousands of interns in London, in Birmingham, many other places, who were working hard with no money. And he also found that those interns were still the lucky ones, because there were poor people in the UK, or people without parental support, who just couldn't even afford to do an internship. Because to do an internship, you need to be able to more or less have a flat, have a place to live, pay for your food, but your employer will not pay for that, right? So you are free labor, essentially. He took issue with that. He thought that was unacceptable. So his response was to say that let's campaign against this, but let's also start a new system where we can gradually transform employers. We can gradually make companies behave better. And he came up with something called the ISIP accreditation scheme, which would sort of rank companies and measure and evaluate companies according to how they treat interns. And those who were treating interns very well would get this accreditation. So young people would see that, whoa, this company is a good one. They have this special sign, special mark, whereas these other companies don't have it, so they might be more risky. He wanted to encourage corporations to change their ways there. And later on, what he did became a bit more service-oriented, and he got a contract with the government. So his campaigning kind of faded into the background. It became more of a service organization, working with other organizations like the government. They're still pursuing this. In the process, Dom became kind of famous and well-known. He took on other roles. He became an advisor to many other startups, and he launched another organization, and he also became part of the Global Shapers community. So he became a member of this global fellowship and network. So he went up in the ranks in a way. But the main point I want to make is that he reassembled bits of the economy. He said interns are not doing very well, companies are not treating them well, but we can use this accreditation scheme and a social enterprise to change that. So he took pieces of the puzzle, put it together, and he tried to make changes, and also he projected that to the media. So he made sure that his ideas would be in circulation. So you would hear about them if you would see BBC or read The Guardian and so forth, you would know about that. So you put these ideas in the dialogue, the discussion. That's important. Two other very quick examples. Algen was started by Rhiannon Colvin in 2014, I believe, and she also was troubled by this idea of interns and the idea that young people have to apply for hundreds of jobs and they still may not be successful. So he saw a lot of youth really struggling in a difficult economy, not just in the UK but also in Spain. So she went to Spain and she was inspired by the magnitude of the unemployment problem and also by the cooperatives she saw there. So she saw that there are new, more communal, collective forms of employment and sort of self-help that could be brought to London. And then she started a new initiative that is a cooperative, but it's a cooperative of cooperatives. So she essentially wants to incubate young people's cooperatives. So again, you have a story where a young person is inspired and in some ways enraged by a social problem. But then what they do is they reassemble bits of the social world. They take parts of the economy, ideas like the cooperative movement, they take ideas like social enterprise, they use the internet in creative ways, and they repackage that and they offer it as a solution. So they remix what is out there. Maybe the most sort of fun one to mention here is the Escape the City, which was started by these gentlemen who were all very bored of their jobs in the city, in the corporate center of London. They were working for consultancies and banks, but they thought, this sucks. This is something I don't want to do. I hate this job. My parents say, you're lucky. You're fortunate you came this far, but I don't want to do this. They felt that they were too afraid to give up on those jobs. They really, in their hearts, they wanted to quit, but they were afraid of that. They were insecure because what will people say, if you quit your job? But they managed to do it. They did it. They left their jobs, and then they thought, well, how about we help others to quit their jobs? And they started Escape the City, which is partly an educational organization and an online community that will sort of instruct you, will advise you. If you want to leave your job with HSBC, it will take you through the steps of how you leave HSBC. And it will give you alternative opportunities, and you can join their community, their evening classes, their escape school, and they have 250,000 members online who've joined them. So this may sound a little bit harmless, a little bit dubious in some ways, but it's becoming a movement. And at least on a micro scale, it's been effective and it's been attractive to a lot of people. And again, there's a recombination here of different tools and different parts of the economy. I mean, they use online forums really well, for instance. They are drawing on the idea of traditional job agencies. So more and more job agencies these days, they obviously offer their jobs online. So they do this online as well, but the contents have changed. So they actually give you a job in, could be a post office in Norway, or it could be a little village in Kenya, and they connect you to more meaningful different opportunities there. Yeah. If you're interested, have a look. Just look them up on the internet using Google or some other search engine and see what they're doing. So these are some examples here, and again, just to explain again my main points. Do these enterprises have interesting business models? Maybe. They're kind of interesting, they're kind of novel, they're kind of new. They're not monumentally amazing, or they're not going to change the whole world, but perhaps they're interesting. Are they creating new employment opportunities? Are they creating new jobs? To some extent. Not really. I mean, it's a few jobs here and there, but they're creating a few jobs. So that's all fine and nice, and there are many papers written about those topics, but for me, what's more interesting is to see these organizations as kind of social interventions. You kind of see societies out there and say, I'm going to do something, and I'm going to intervene. I'm going to change how A and B are connected, or I'm going to change how 80-year-old think about working and think about their hobbies and their work-life balance and all that. There are also economic innovations in a sense that they combine different models. They can be very capitalistic in one way, but they can be cooperative in another way. They're recombinations of cultural material, and this may be the hardest point to properly communicate to you, but we can come back to this. But in the end, and ultimately, what's interesting is that these young entrepreneurs are shapers of our economic futures. And I'm sure you will be among them very soon, some of you. But why is this democratic participation, you might ask? Why should we think of this as democratic somehow? This is the point I want to develop in future papers and maybe books as well, because it's not so obvious. I'm borrowing here from somebody called J.M. Balkin, and you don't have to read all of that, and your poor interpreter doesn't need to interpret all of that. But all I want to say is that in our democracies, we have certain institutions, decision-making institutions like the central government, we have voting practices and so forth, and that's vital, but what seems to underpin that or support that is a democratic culture. It's almost more important to have a culture of debate, culture of talking, culture of openness than those institutions, because the institutions can always disappear or decay, or they can be weakened and so forth. But if you have a democratic culture, this idea that you can participate and engage and shape, everything can be saved. And for me, we all live in democratic cultures for the most part, even though they are challenged. And economic participation needs to be part of that. So connecting to that, I want to say that cultures are changing, our economic cultures are changing, which means that the way that we participate is also changing. Many other scholars from the US mainly, they've talked about digital participation, how you participate in online petitions or how you debate an issue on Facebook or other social media. That's become very central. So that's something that you do every day with your friends maybe, or at school or beyond that. So that should be protected. That's their argument. My argument connects to that and says that innovation and entrepreneurship are also becoming very central, and our cultures are economic cultures. They're very business-oriented cultures, for better or for worse. We don't necessarily like it, but these are business-oriented cultures. So therefore, we must be able to shape those cultures, because that's who we are. Cultures are part of what we are, who we are, our identities, and so forth. So I would like to say that your ability to remix economic culture is as vital as digital participation, digital remixing. So what you can do is copy and imitate and mix and adapt and synthesize and all that. May sound a bit strange, but to me that's the very essence of democratic economic participation, that you take elements from around you. You may like some bits about your school, you may dislike other parts of it, you may take the good parts and combine those good parts with something that you see in a private enterprise, you see in an online educational forum, or somewhere else that I just don't know about. So you're able to do that mixing. Now, I think the objection that we will get today, again, is that isn't entrepreneurial participation very uneven, very unequal? Isn't it true that not everybody can be involved in that? If it's so unequal, can it somehow be democratized? Can we democratize democratic economic participation? That's a big question, and I would like to say that, first of all, unfortunately, all forms of participation are uneven. Even voting is very uneven. Young people, for one reason or another, seem to be excluded from voting more and more. Also, if you think of online forums, debates in the city, not everybody will participate at the same level. So that's sort of a fact of life. But at the same time, access must be widened. Access can be widened, and access must be widened. So it must be made easier for us all and for you to actually participate in the reshaping and remixing of the economy. How can this be done? And well, first, why should we widen access? In the long term, I really believe personally, and this may sound very stereotypical or naive, but I really expect for young people to shape the future. And I believe that young people care about the future, about housing, about the environment, about prosperity, about sustaining this country called Italy and many other countries. Young people care. So therefore we should get these people who care in power, and they should be engaged, and they should be calling the shots, and obviously collaborating with other generations. I'm not saying it's just the youth, but I'm saying youth are the ones who care, so therefore they should have a really big say in our economic futures. There's a huge danger here if we don't do anything, and that danger is this libertarian Silicon Valleyism, or libertarian Silicon Valley syndrome. We all know about Google and Facebook and Twitter and Dropbox and Evernote and all these fancy Silicon Valley apps that we use. Not all of them are from or based in Silicon Valley. Snapchat in LA and whatnot. There are corporations in Berlin and London and so forth that think in the same way. But essentially, it is a very narrow, small echo chamber. If you ever visit Google, you will notice that these people are not Renaissance human beings, Renaissance men or women. Some of them may be, but most of them believe that people who are able, who have the highest skills, they should control the world. And whatever Google does is right. And if Google will put some, let's say, something negative about you in its searches, it should stay there forever. If somebody bullied you, or you bullied somebody in school, and your local newspaper wrote about that, or somebody, your friend wrote about that, Google has believed that should stay there forever. They have no sense, and I'm not talking about all of Google, all of Silicon Valley, but I'm saying that there's a hard core which sees human culture in a very narrow sense. And Italy, of course, I think, is on the other extreme, where there's this idea that we can read philosophy, we can read about law, but we can also do arts, we can know programming, we can love fashion, and so forth. But we don't need to be just specific to one area. But in Silicon Valley, programming seems to be enough as an education for a human being. And I'm not completely opposed to that. I'm also open to using these skills. But I'm saying that there's one variety, one ideology, one narrow echo chamber there that's quite dangerous, and as we've seen already in terms of conflicts between the EU and Google and Amazon and large companies that do not really pay taxes either. So we can come back to that issue. But what I'm advocating here is that we build a more diverse entrepreneurial culture, that more people can participate. So the closest thing to a magic bullet, to a magic solution, would be creating innovative and inclusive, diverse entrepreneurial communities. So that even if you're not a Silicon Valley type or a programmer, you can participate in the shaping of the future. It's difficult alone. You can do stuff alone. You can set up a chat room, or you can set up a campaign, or you can collect donations. There are things you can do alone. But if you want to really start an enterprise or an organization, you probably need support. You will probably need support. Where to get that support? It's within communities, within hubs, so-called hubs, and places where people really welcome you and say that, tell us your idea. Tell us what you're thinking. Tell us how you're going to do it. We might introduce a mentor to you. We might help you brainstorm. We might help you get connected to funding sources and so forth. So these communities are quite important, and they need to create new institutional structures, and they need to really empower enlightened, diverse entrepreneurs who care about the future, who who care about sustainability and prosperity in a wider sense, not just in terms of creating the best and most convenient apps for us. I mean, Uber may be convenient, but it's also, while it's creating value, it's destroying value. And it doesn't really see that so clearly. So we need to create more enlightened and broad-minded entrepreneurs, I would say. Just to give you sort of a visual picture of what these entrepreneurial communities or their spaces and platforms look like. Here are a few pictures. This is from the Impact Hub Islington here, up on the left. One of the first social innovation incubation spaces in the UK, started in 2005 as part of the anti-globalization movement. So it was kind of a home for change makers. The one on the right is a space in Osaka, Japan. So just to show that this movement is spreading, that there are these free spaces, open spaces where you can bring your laptop, team up with others, have workshops, talk about different business models, social problems, social design, and so forth. The biggest one perhaps in this domain is the one in Piccadilly Circus, Impact Hub Westminster here. Obviously, I think this is taken late at night or maybe early in the morning, because usually the space is full, absolutely full, about 150 people there every day from different occupational backgrounds and organizations. There are government-funded centers, which I haven't yet had the chance to research, but places like the Digital Catapult Center in London again, near King's Cross. And there is the Google campus. I don't find it a bad place as such. I think they're trying to broaden access as well. I just met the director last week, Sarah Drinkwater, who speaks a lot about increasing female participation, making sure that women can participate in this tech startup community, because famously, as you know, it's been a really male culture. So something like 90% of startups are launched by men, especially in California, but also in London. So she really is passionate about making it diverse in that way, having meetings that discuss the issues that are specific to female entrepreneurship. There are hubs in many African countries like Kenya and Rwanda. It's become a huge phenomenon there. And on the opposite end of the spectrum, you have sort of financial or finance tech incubators like Level 39 in London as well. So you can sort of have different specialisms for hubs. And some of these hubs, I believe, will come to focus on sustainability, sustainable prosperity, and because that's quite difficult sometimes to do, universities have a special role, city governments have a special role there. So these big organizations need to become kind of the buffers, the organizers and the buffers. They need to create funding in this space so people can do more creative things, more forward-looking things, instead of just having to worry about being profitable next month. So that brings me to my conclusion for now, but I hope this is a start for a good debate. So thanks for your attention so far. Thank you.
Working properly. Yeah, now you can. Well, thanks, Tuka, for this challenging, stimulating scenery about social innovation today and what youth entrepreneurship might mean for us in the foreseeable future. First of all, before we start collecting your questions, which I hope are going to be challenging for Tuka, I want to ask you something. When we use the concept of social innovation, what comes to your mind? What's the idea for you of social innovation? I mean, I can tell you what's more or less agreed in the literature, in the existing literature on social innovation. What does it mean? But what about you? When we talk about social innovations, to create social innovations, what do you think? What comes to your mind? Speak freely. Or, okay, let's do like that. First, I'm going to tell you about at least 3 points, let's say 3 common denominators of all the existing definitions about social innovation. First, social innovation is social both in its means and its ends or goals. Means and ends. It's socially made and it targets social goals first. Second, social innovation is about empowerment. Empowerment, which means there's no conventional, traditional distinction between producers and users. You're not just using a service, you're contributing to it, you're shaping it one way or another. And at the same time, social innovation should create relationships. And another element, it should answer social needs, new and pressing social needs, more effectively than existing policies. And to me, this is the most important point, the point which in a sense is, shading a potential risk, a potential trap. Because when we say we should implement social innovations, we should think about social innovations, is exactly because our public spending is too high, our national budgets are, giants, and we have to invent something new. But I think we should be careful, and this is why Emanuele was saying at the beginning that I'm sort of critical about a certain discourse about social innovation, about a certain rhetorical use of the social innovation. When we say there is no alternative, and a few years ago there was a famous prime minister in England using the there is no alternative logic, Tina, it was Margaret Thatcher. So when we say there is no alternative, can we be 101% sure that this is the case? Or maybe we actually have alternatives that are not, let's say, a substitute for social innovation. They, of course, are a complement to it. But let's put aside the three common denominators of social innovation, and I wanna ask Tuka to come back to some of the points that he raised during the presentation, which I think might need some clarification. The first one, the millennial generation, those born after 1983. So it seems that I'm part of them because I was born in '83. You said millennials are not just interested in finding jobs, having a job, but giving a contribution, contribute to their society, making a change, having an impact. The second point that I think should be more clarified is about the digital participation, online communities, digital participation. I don't know how many of you heard the term Slacktivism, Slack activism. It's a sort of easy way to be active. When we talk traditionally, when we talk about political engagement, we think about demonstrations on the street, a direct and material, let's say, involvement into politics. When you just click on like on Facebook, are you properly politically active? When you sign a petition on change.org, are you having an impact on the global society? Or it's, I don't want to be provocative, it's just an easy way to clean up your consciousness and to feel good about what you're doing in this world. Another point, and this is really difficult to I mean, I'm not expecting an answer. He was saying, is it really feasible? Do you think it's really feasible today in Italy, in this country, to imagine yourself as a teenager and prospective young adult as an entrepreneur? Daring question for you. Let's start with that, and then we'll move on.
Okay. Long, can you hear me? All right. I'll try to speak up. I'll begin with the last question because actually the beginning of the answer is quite simple. It's simpler than you would think, especially if you think of entrepreneurship in a broad sense. So It's not always about starting a for-profit company. It could be starting a non-profit company. It could be starting an informal group with your friends or something with a purpose, something with a goal. But even easier than that is the act of having a conversation. And I think that's what we're doing today here. But what's important is that you begin to have conversations that remix the economy. That's the beginning of entrepreneurship for me, that you begin to say that, how about we have a sharing platform here, for instance, for something that's very local. I don't really know what you might want to share. Could be clothes, or could be bits of art, or could be old CDs, or whatever you like to use in your lives. And you combine your favorite thing or favorite hobby with one idea from the economy, like a sharing platform or a cooperative. And you simply have a chat about that. You just talk to your friends about that, or you talk about that in class. There's nothing sacred, nothing special about that, or nothing sort of difficult about that. It's not difficult. And you start combining things in your mind and combining things in your conversation. That's the seed of social innovation to me, and that's why I wanted to start with something very basic today that may sound a little non-theoretical or atheoretical, but to me the beginnings are easy. Just have coffee and talk about how that coffee is made, how that coffee is traded, how value is created when you sell coffee. Maybe the value is not in the raising of coffee; it's more in the selling of it in rich countries, for example. You think, how could we have a more sustainable coffee shop or coffee industry and so forth? So that's number one. It's easy. Just have a chat about it and try to remix some of those ideas. That's my first, so kind of an invitation to social innovation in a way. Just let's start talking about it. As for millennials, and is this a common term in Italy? Do you ever use this?
Is it that common? Is it that familiar to you, millennials? Anyways, those born after 1983.
When I first heard this term, it sounded a bit like a religious sect. Some people who believe that the
yeah, actually, this is what comes to your mind.
end of the world is coming in the year 2000. It didn't happen, so maybe they just used the same word for a different purpose.
Yeah.
Or maybe some cheeky older people thought that young people are, that's a suitable term for young people. I don't know.
I think it's also because it's funny and it's cool to
Catchy.
be about the millennium. Everyone
catchy.
wants to be one way or another connected to
Yeah. So I guess 2 points to make about this is that I'm very skeptical about stereotypes, because I had a chance to write a PhD on needs in Japan, so unemployed people in Japan, and they were kind of branded or labeled or stereotyped and generalized.
Sorry, Tuka. Is it clear for everyone what the acronym NEET means? NEET. Not in education, employment, or training.
Exactly.
So basically doing nothing, except for Facebooking or.
But in reality, I found in Japan that these youth were actually pretty active. Some of them were in training, some of them were working online, or some of them really desperately wanted to work. So I understood that stereotyping is not good. So millennials, it's another stereotype. So we should be careful about it. But companies like Deloitte or consultancies, even researchers, sometimes we find it useful to use a term to kind of make things catchy and interesting. And a lot of companies seem to be very desperate to understand what you want. They want to understand what you want because they want to sell things to you, and they want to obviously develop educational programs to you, provide good training, but they also, they want to keep you working for their companies. If they find that they like you, they want to keep you, and they ask companies like Deloitte to provide them with advice on how to keep you. So if you say you like social impact and you like social contributions, they will devise some kind of CSR, corporate social responsibility program, which you can do for 3 hours every week, and they hope that they can keep you by doing that. So there is this, in every era, I suppose, in history, there's this tension or insecurity or nervousness about understanding the youth. So take it with a grain of salt would be my advice. Don't believe it. Don't believe all of it. Final point about online activism, right? Is it enough to just click things on change.org and believe that you are making a change or difference? I think it can be part of the toolbox. It can be part of the toolbox or vocabulary or range of alternatives that we can use if we want to use it. And also it can be step into a process. It can be step one, first step. If you care about an issue like pollution near Heathrow, for example, in Europe, the busiest airport, then you might start by joining a campaign. But the next point might be to think about some kind of alternative to Heathrow, using trains or using teleconferencing or talking to your MP and so forth. So I think we're still learning. I think our societies are learning and we're not there yet. That would be mine. But shall we? Those were great questions. So I very much appreciate those queries. Shall we open it up for some questions from the audience as well?
So we have slightly less than an hour. So as I repeat what I was telling you before. Considering the difficulty we would have in translating what you say, try to be very brief and keep the rule, the rule of thumb, of 1 minute per intervention per question. Just I want to say two things on what you were saying that bring us into the general theme of the conference. We will talk about online activism and activism in general tomorrow afternoon. So for those of you who are interested in online activism, tomorrow we're going to have Paolo Gerbaldo, which just wrote a book called Tweet on the Streets. So he's a great expert of engagement and political action through online media. And the second thing that I found interesting, and I would like to emphasize what you've been saying, is about labeling. So basically providing a label for social phenomenon we do not understand, stereotyping people. Like when you go and talk in political talk shows in Italy, or you read about newspapers, and they talk about political engagement of youth, they say young people don't vote anymore, young people are not engaged. And in the moment in which they sell this notion to the general public, very often the youth, which is quite weak for many economic and social reasons in this country, sort of embed this idea that they are inept people, that people unable to be engaged and unable to be active. Considering we have a lot of young people in this room, I think, and I might use a bad word here, this is all bullshit. This is all something that it doesn't make any sense. And the more we get convinced by this rhetoric, as Tuca and Francesco were saying, the more we make these narratives of society strong, the more we make them convincing. When the problem is not about the youth only, but sometimes the youth or young people might have problems, might not be able to engage, or might be disengaged. But sometimes it might be a system that prevent them from access to certain resources. So, don't buy into these stereotypes, and this, of course, should be for everybody in society, and not only for young people. Sorry for that, I overused my role of chair, and we start with Giacomo. Gabriele, sorry, Giacomini. Yeah, that was the.
Ci sarà bisogno della traduzione. Allora, innanzitutto molto molto interessante. Spero che ci sia la traduzione. No, la fai tu, ok. È molto molto interessante. Innanzitutto faccio complimenti per le scarpe, delle scarpe audaci per un relatore audace, e con questo complimento spero di poter prendere più di un minuto. Quindi mi sono preso lascia passare per una captatio benevolenzi, ecco, utilizziamo una lingua straniera, il latino. No, a parte appunto le battute, no? Allora, il tema è molto interessante. Io in parte, ecco, sono rimasto, non sono perfettamente d'accordo con Emanuele circa la questione appunto dello slacktivism, no? E perché io lo vedo, io non parlo di stereotipi, io parlo di cose che tocco ogni giorno. Allora, io sono assessore innovazione del Comune di Udine e c'è una certa, percepisco una certa difficoltà nei giovani ad organizzarsi. l'organizzazione online è un'organizzazione che può essere utile, ma poi ci sono altre cose che contano. Lo vedo quando organizziamo i lavori socialmente utili, gli LSU, gli LPU, e quando invece un assessore, il sottoscritto, alza la mano in giunta per avere dei tirocini per ragazzi universitari. Dietro di me ho il vuoto. Cioè, lo dico proprio come mio problema personale, quasi psicologico, no? Cioè, mentre dietro gli LSU e gli LPU, che sono strumenti di incentivazione al lavoro di persone che hanno già cassa integrazione, mobilità, eccetera, eccetera, un sacco di soldi per gli LSU e LPU. Ho email anche stamattina di LSU del comune di Udine che mi chiedono: andiamo dalla regione invece per i tirocini non c'è nulla. Io incontro, non c'è forza sociale, non c'ho un gruppo di giovani che mi dicono il problema del comune di Udine, ed è un problema, è il blocco delle assunzioni, cerchiamo di trovare alternative, c'è il nulla. E quando faccio gli incontri sono brutale con questi ragazzi universitari, miei coetanei, perché ad esempio nei tirocini loro pensano di poter andare in malattia, ma invece non possono andare in malattia perché il tirocino è un'indennità per il lavoro che fanno, quindi se non lavorano e stanno a casa, allora succede che non possono avere malattie. E loro cadono. Cioè, ma sì, ma veramente è così. No? Quindi...
Can I just summarize?
Sì, sì, sì.
It was mentioning, let's say, a real life barrier and obstacle is perceiving. For example, when it comes to discussions about, let's say, ordinary tools for the temporarily unemployed people, like LSU, LPU, there is already a consensus and, let's say, a social force behind them in order for them to be approved, accepted, and implemented. When it comes to internships, on the other side, on the other hand, it seems that youngsters are not yet, at least, organized enough in order to put some pressure. And even when it comes to discussing about internships, many people do not really know what internships are about, what kind of rights you have.
Okay. Quindi questo è un aspetto importante, e poi su cui si può approfondire. Ma detto questo, che diciamo così, è stato sappungolato da Emanuele, ma tornando più alle considerazioni del professore. Sì, sì. Sì, però appunto una certa attenzione a certi aspetti dei giovani non permette ai giovani poi di essere attivi in certi luoghi che contano veramente. Questa è la mia tesi. Detto questo, ecco, ritornando alla questione del professore, sono rimasto interessato all'argomentazione proprio perché anch'io scrissi qualche anno fa un libricino con il sindaco Onsel, parlai un po' della condizione dei giovani, della loro difficoltà a organizzarsi e fare politica, però quando mi interrogai e mi pensai, ma non posso fare solo una pars destruens, manca una pars construens, mi domandai allora quali sono le forme di organizzazione dei giovani, e in effetti individuai proprio l'aspetto delle start-up, di questa modalità sociale di innovazione e di appunto imprenditoria. Tuttavia ero abbastanza insoddisfatto, nel senso che da un certo punto di vista è vero, la democrazia non è soltanto democrazia in senso minimalista o realista, quindi non è soltanto regola della maggioranza, non è soltanto il governo rappresentativo, eccetera, eccetera, ma in senso più dialogico, no? È anche organizzare delle forme collettive di pressione, eccetera, eccetera, eccetera. Quindi da questo punto di vista qui sono d'accordo. Però mi accorgo che poi queste forme di organizzazione hanno dei problemi, come diceva il professore, molto gravi, no? C'è un articolo su Internazionale che ho letto in cui si dice: nel meraviglioso mondo dell'industria culturale e creativa italiana c'è gente che non percepisce stipendio d'agosto, c'è gente che quest'anno deve anticipare le tasse e l'anticipo che è maggiore del reddito che ha percepito, gente che lavora a partita IVA e che non le entra un lavoro da marzo, sono 3 anni che è convinta di chiudere la partita IVA ma non ha i soldi per farlo, c'è gente iscritta a dottorato senza borsa che fa la cameriera nei night a 25 euro in nero a sera, eccetera, eccetera, eccetera. Cioè, la centralità di un lavoro creativo e la sua marginalità sociale e economica sono una porta girevole. Ed è quello che cercavo un po', su cui mi interrogavo ieri facendo la domanda circa la relazione fra innovazione e appunto e lavoro, distribuzione del lavoro. Cioè, è vero, come disse Quaglia, che poi il nostro obiettivo nel progresso è quello di lavorare tutti meno e lavorare meglio. Tuttavia, ora cosa c'è? Ci sono gli insider, no? Che lavorano magari male, pagati bene, e poi ci sono questi outsider che certo sono creativi, si organizzano in parte, però poi dal punto di vista economico sono del tutto marginali e non sono, anche per quanto riguarda i diritti, eccetera, eccetera. Quindi la mia domanda è, ma come soluzione ai problemi, la soluzione sia dal punto di vista economico sia dal punto di vista politico, seppur anch'io, io stesso l'ho individuata come una cosa positiva, tuttavia adesso, ad oggi, anche politicamente, è una cosa molto debole. E lo vediamo quando poi il governo Renzi deve decidere se dare 80 euro oppure fare il reddito minimo, no? Quindi la mia domanda è appunto, questa situazione, una situazione che secondo lei andrà ad evolversi, i giovani cercheranno grazie a queste forme di cambiare le cose veramente, oppure invece in realtà è soltanto un modo per pensare di cambiare le cose, mentre le cose in realtà restano come sono?
Shall we collect more questions?
I'll focus. But that's a lot of questions. I'll forget if I don't answer it now. I'll probably.
I wouldn't,
Okay,
I wouldn't like to be in your shoes.
Then we'll collect, so try to answer that.
Okay. No. Thank you for the question and for the compliment. That's very kind. It's. I definitely would not like to pretend that I understand Italy more than you. I'm really new to Italy, so I can't really speak about specific problems within Italy per se. But I guess the first thing to observe is that isn't that depressing, and isn't that overwhelming? Thinking about these problems, and certainly, I agree, it can feel overwhelming, but being overwhelmed is disempowering. So my argument would be to sort of not to say that we always have to be positive. I'm not saying we always have to be positive or blind to the problems. But if we feel very overwhelmed, then we can take action. So at a very personal level, I would say that today is a great day and it's a great event because it's a start to a discussion. So it's a start to doing that and start to kind of connecting the dots in our minds. So that can happen at a very micro level, as I'm sure many of you have really done in your lives and in classrooms. So we can do very micro things, small things, discussions about coffee or about unemployment benefits or in a certain area or various part-time work opportunities. We can do that. Then we can also look into the future. And I think step one is really to begin that conversation, because what I heard from my colleagues last night was that Italy really obviously has a wonderful past. People often refer to that past. They're proud of it, and that's great. And there are a lot of discussions about the present, but there are not many discussions about the future. And what's wonderful about this event and about your generation is that you are starting to talk about the future. And I think that's a great step, and you can feel more positive about it, you can feel more empowered about it. You may feel that nothing will change in 1 year, but perhaps in 10 years, perhaps in 20 years. I'd rather that we use our lives to think about those little solutions than that we feel very overpowered. Right? So I'd rather sort of start the conversation as we're doing today than feel overpowered. And so I can see both sides. I can see that it is very, very challenging, but also like us to start unraveling those things. But I really appreciate the question. I would love to read your books. About these problems. So please publish them in English.
We can collect more questions. I think one interesting point to begin over using viral chat to build a bridge is that in a sense we have all this creative industry, but we talk more, and I advertise I suggest you come off the guy standing talk. So on the one hand, we need to have these freely creative energies across society, but on the other hand, we need to try to build a structural support for these people, knowing that the structural support, and you know that very well, being also a scholar on social policy, cannot only be built through work today, but somehow we need to support the income of people in order to reduce, in my opinion, this this empowering feeling, this negative idea that the world is too heavy to be tackled to. So in order to be creative and free, you need to have somehow a kind of help, like a hand that is given to you, which is not too much to bring you to make you inactive, but on the other hand, really helps you in the worst moments, in the moments in which you feel disempowered. I think if I interpret somehow what Gabriele was saying is, in the end, good, we need to be creative, start up, whatever. But in a situation in which you cannot manage to have some support, it becomes very, very hard to have conversation, to start this, this positive, empowering feeling you were talking about. It when you talk to people and say, okay, we have a good idea, we can share that. But if you are so disempowered and so pessimistic about the future of the place in which you live in, it's very hard that you can begin this process. This does not have to be used as an excuse for not doing things, but there is a perpetual tension between the structural and the individual micro level. So let's collect other questions. From students? No, yeah, well, there probably have to be from students looking at the composition of the room.
Students, don't be shy.
Nobody? Yeah, good.
Questo è importante. Prima il professore Tucca parlava riguardo il potere di noi giovani di cambiare la nostra cultura economica. Quindi l'attuale cultura economica è caratterizzata dal consumismo. E per risolvere questi problemi, quindi dare opportunità ai giovani, bisogna investire sulle start-up. Le start-up sono queste nuove fabbriche innovative che comunque io credo non creino bisogni, ma creino desideri. E creare desideri è il tipico della società consumistica. Quindi ricadiamo sempre nella solita della nostra stessa economia attuale.
What was the final point about?
Do you have any other questions? Maybe free.
Yeah.
Don't be shy, guys.
It was basically saying rather than satisfying.
So
Needs, they create desires.
Yeah. Okay.
They
No, I get
produce
that.
desires.
people then really start to ask questions when the session is ending. So be brave and ask, whatever comes up to your mind.
Can I try to answer that to
Oh,
give
yeah,
people
sure.
a bit more time to their courage up to ask questions? But that was a fantastic question, and again shows that there are so many contradictions in the system we're living in. What's sort of beautiful about startups and enterprises is that actually they can be quite diverse, and it's an open space or a field for you to develop into different directions. Some are very consumerist, other are moderately consumerists, other are very sort of anti-consumerist, and of course that will raise issues about financing. If you're not consumerist in a way, how do you finance your startup? There are some real big problems, but I think in the middle space you have things like Street Bank in the UK that will help you to share your belongings. Could be your skis or your guitars or your TVs and so forth. So instead of asking people to buy new things, you get them to share, and obviously that's now the famous idea of the sharing economy. It has its own problems, but to me, one sort of prior activity to having a startup is thinking about these things. So I think you're on the right track, and if you think of how to have a non-consumerist startup, I think that would be the best first step for you. How do you do that, and what would be the funding streams to enable that, and can you do it with volunteers in some ways? But we'll come back to that. I think that's a great question.
More questions?
lecture and for this interesting discussion. I'm working for the local science and technology park. We have a co-working area, we have an incubator of startups, so I'm very in the topic of today. And my question is this: how much does the critical mass influence the possibility of starting this process of social innovation? I mean, you have shown us pictures of big hubs in London and other metropoles, but we are talking now, we are in Udine, and we are talking about a territory which has small cities. And from my point of view, from my experience, sometimes the problem of having movements, big movements, and involving not only young people but people willing to start up something is this. So the number of these people and the environment.
No, absolutely, a wonderful, important question, I would say. And of course, one has to acknowledge that big cities like London, perhaps Rome and Milan and so forth, they're quite special in the sense that a lot of ideas are coming to these cities. Diverse people are coming from around the world, those cities. So they are kind of mixing places for ideas. And also, there's a bit less cohesion, so people feel free to have strange hairstyles and weird shoes like this, and sort of, different lifestyles. So big cities are special in that sense. But that doesn't mean that smaller cities cannot do many things, and there are advantages. And I think one is that kind of cohesion, that people are closer and they're more networked, and they can easily share what they know. So if things get started, then there'll be much more sort of pull and magnetism and maybe coherence. But how to get things moving? There may be many strategies to do that. And of course, one needs very positive leaders who sort of who get the crowd together. You can have the intellectuals. The intellectuals may be important, but you need somebody who's kind of rallying, who's kind of doing crazy things, and who's sort of really not afraid to be a clown in a way, and to have fun with it, and sort of really make people feel that this is an open space. You need to feel that there's freedom here. Even if you're 12 years old, you can have the best business idea or the best entrepreneurial or social innovation idea in the room. If you're 12, that's fine. And I'm in my 30s, but I accept that, and I respect your idea. So that sort of respectful space is important. And finally, there are some very inventive, exceptional initiatives like Startup Chile. Startup Chile, where they bring in entrepreneurs from around the world for half year, for a year. They pay everything for you. You go there and you launch, and then you leave. That's fine, because you're bringing in this new spirit and new ideas, and the locals change because the foreigners come in, and it may be just 50 of them at first, but it creates a buzz. So a lot of techniques can be used, I would say, and I don't know what the critical number is, but a lot of techniques. It becomes kind of an art of how to create that buzz. So, thank you.
Okay, then we have a question first, and then we move to the other one. Okay.
Bene, buongiorno. La cosa che mi ha colpito molto della sua lezione di oggi è legata all'insieme delle varie attività, delle nuove imprenditorialità che sono emerse soprattutto nei grandi centri, no? Abbiamo parlato prevalentemente di metropoli, perché anche nel riferimento italiano che lei ha fatto ha parlato di Milano e di Roma. Gli hub come Impact Hub che lei ha citato ci sono anche in territori come il nostro. Impact Hub è a Trieste. Conosco molto bene gli imprenditori che lavorano all'interno di Impact Hub. Quello che mi chiedo, la domanda che vorrei fare a lei, è se dobbiamo immaginare, visto che il tema del FutureForum è ricostruzione economica, dobbiamo immaginare la futura economia legata solamente a un'economia di servizi, di nuove idee, di start-up, o possiamo immaginare un'economia legata anche al tessuto economico locale, ad esempio basato sul commercio, sui servizi, sul turismo, che in Italia sono dei punti cardine, dei punti molto importanti. Lo dico perché sono il presidente dei giovani imprenditori di Confcommercio e quando parliamo con i nostri associati tutti capiscono che ci sono grandi possibilità dal punto di vista delle nuove idee, delle start-up, ma non capiscono quale può essere invece il futuro delle loro imprese tradizionali, delle imprese che però di fatto creano il tessuto urbano di tutte le città italiane, ma anche del resto del mondo.
Thank you. I think I understood most of it, thanks to this great interpreter here. But so there are many ideas, many issues about whether we should mainly focus on the future economic model or these ideas or the local networks, right? Local networks. I'm sure they are not mutually exclusive. I'm sure they go together. I'm sure they have to go together in some ways because we always need to build on what's already there. And I'm sure Udine is unique in many ways, so I wouldn't want to, again, pretend that I know much about Udine. But the one way to kind of bring those together could be to have some sort of a model area or district like you already seem to have, where you have traditional companies and businesses who collaborate with the newer enterprises, and they think of some new experimental products or ideas or services. And they might also have a space like this to think about the next economic model, how things might look 20 years later, 30 years later. There are many things that are changing, so businesses always need to adapt, I suppose, wherever they are, whether they are social businesses or for-profit businesses, they need to adapt. And I suppose the traditional companies might get new ideas from the newer players on how to adapt into this very changeable, very dynamic, difficult context where I suppose Italy is getting older. There's a lot of aging, so basically the age structure is becoming like this. There are fewer youth, markets are going abroad and so forth. So I'm sure there's a synergy there, and I'd love to talk more about that later and also to understand the local context better. I don't know enough about Udine to fully comment on that. Thank you.
Good morning, thank you very much. I actually have a whole list of short questions. I'll just have to choose some of them. But I find it interesting that the old economy, let's call it like that, even though old is a bad word, but the existing economy and the existing public administration are telling us they're having some bad time. And I think what's happening today is that we're having an invitation to take part in a solution to what's also their problem. So basically, I'm gonna choose two of my questions. One, were our parents, I'm also millennial, 83, but right on time, so just became a partita IVA freelance instead of a corporate worker. So I'm right there.
You're embodying the spirit.
Exactly. Probably, this is actually a question. I was thinking about this right now. Is economy becoming for us just another tool like many others when it used to be a solution to many of our problems? I mean, finding a job used to be the solution to the rest of your problems.
At least many of them.
Yes. And then everything else you could be doing. When my parents could find a job or have a job for the rest of their life. For our generation, this is mostly impossible. So is now economy a tool that we use to solve this kind of problem? This is one question. And then to add to that, do you think we actually need a helping hand to liberate us from the economical problems so that we can be creative, which is a very interesting interesting term, or is it the challenge that we need, and then we will rise up to that challenge? I'm actually not sure about.
If you took out needs to do an interview very quickly with Giorno, so like if you can go, we can collect more questions. We write them down, and so you can answer them. You can do that later. Okay. Collect that. So we might collect more questions. Sorry for that, but that's the beauty of doing that on the spot.
Really great 4 questions. So let's definitely come back to
I'm not going to answer your questions. It's going.
So if you have more questions, like either Francesco can take questions, so we can continue the discussion and collect other points. So it doesn't mean we're not going to answer you, but it's not a way of evading. It's not a very refined way of evading a question. So do we have any other question from the audience? Yeah, it will take 5 minutes, but like we can keep going with the discussion, and if there are specific questions for Tuka, we can just collect them. I know it's slightly complicated to manage, but that's life. It's like coping with tough situations is part of what we would have to do.
Possiamo parlare in italiano.
Sì, possiamo parlare in italiano, sì. Ci sono altre domande? Magari l'italiano rende le cose più...
Non siate timidi. Per chiedermi anche qualcosa sulla Finlandia.
No. Tu avevi qualche punto che volevi riprendere rispetto a...
Sì, però non so quanto tempo abbiamo. E un'altra cosa che vorrei che Tucca espandesse un po', perché lui ha accennato a questo punto, è il discorso sul business oriented language che utilizziamo anche all'interno della social theory, cioè il fatto che termini come capitale, investimento, innovazione, che sono termini tipici del settore privato, delle imprese del settore privato, sono ormai diventati concetti chiave delle scienze sociali, sia per chi teorizza in questo campo, sia per chi lavora, quelli che in inglese si chiamerebbero practitioners. Questo secondo me dice molto sullo spirito dei tempi, il fatto che si parli di social capital, social investment, social innovation. Questi termini sono stati presi in prestito dal mondo delle imprese e sono stati adattati alla teoria sociale. I termini quasi mai sono neutri. Prima quel mio riferimento al non ci sono alternative della Thatcher, che spesso viene recuperato anche se non è citato chiaramente in modo diretto, però quando ad esempio ieri Emanuele parlava di mantenimento della spesa pubblica costante, a livello costante, con una ridistribuzione di risorse dalle generazioni più anziane alle generazioni più giovani, perché viviamo in un paese in cui gran parte dei soldi pubblici vengono utilizzati per le pensioni e molto poco viene utilizzato a sostegno dei ventenni e dei trentenni, immediatamente c'è stato un commento da parte del moderatore, se non sbaglio, quindi tu proponi di aumentare la spesa pubblica, cioè c'è questa sorta di riflesso condizionato, per cui se si parla di ridistribuzione e di forse delle alternative ci sono a questo stato di cosa, allora tu vuoi spendere di più, non possiamo spendere di più perché l'Europa ce lo chiede di non spendere di più, no? Lo sentite sempre, l'Europa ce lo chiede. Siamo veramente sicuri di questo? E altro elemento, siamo veramente sicuri che termini come empowerment è un termine che in italiano possiamo tradurre con capacitazione, autocapacitazione, cioè ti autopotenzi in qualche modo, ti autodoti di risorse e capacità che non credevi di avere, che invece stavano in te in maniera potenziale, aspettavano soltanto di esplodere. Che siano termini neutri, cioè questo quasi impercettibile, ma ormai abbastanza evidente, slittamento dalla responsabilità pubblica condivisa, lo Stato che si fa carico di una serie di cose, arrangiatevi, vedete un po' voi come dovete fare, inventatevi la startup, inventatevi il coworking, inventatevi questo e quello, coi soldi di chi? Coi soldi di mamma e di papà, perché certamente noi non ve ne diamo, non è probabilmente del tutto neutro questa serie di termini che utilizziamo.
Sicuramente, se posso integrare questo, è un tema che mi interessa molto. Guardate, e fate riferimento, secondo me uno dei più grandi indicatori è l'uso della parola capitale che costantemente si fa. Abbiamo parlato il primo giorno di territorio, abbiamo parlato di capitale territoriale, parliamo di relazioni tra gli individui e parliamo di capitale sociale, parliamo di educazione e università e parliamo di capitale umano. Cioè, sostanzialmente i termini non sono mai neutri. Se parliamo di cambiare la società, di trasformazioni sociali, o parliamo di innovazione sociale, non è un tema neutro. E il punto interessante che dobbiamo porci è come vengano utilizzati certi modelli a volte per ritrarre una realtà molto difficile e dire vabbè, però possiamo cavarcela con il nostro ingegno, no? Io sono d'accordo con quello che si diceva rispetto, beh, facciamole le start-ups, qua nessuno verrà a dire se avete delle belle idee, sviluppatele, giustissimo, però non dobbiamo mai dimenticare che il nostro è un paese, l'Italia non è più un paese del primissimo mondo, del primo mondo direi, nel senso l'Italia non è capace dal punto di vista della ricerca scientifica e della creazione dell'innovazione di competere con paesi come gli Stati Uniti, ma anche come la Germania, il Regno Unito, per tante serie di ragioni. Allora dovremmo essere intelligenti, secondo me, e cercare di capire che innovazione in Italia può voler dire magari delle cose diverse da quelle che può essere in Inghilterra, quindi per esempio innovare e per esempio fare turismo in una maniera un po' più intelligente, imparando andando all'estero. Secondo me uno dei grandi problemi che abbiamo in Italia, del quale dovremmo discutere, e che io vedo in questi giorni, io vedo sempre, quando torno in Italia e mi confronto con giornalisti, con alcuni accademici, è la nostra chiusura, è la nostra più completa incapacità a confrontarci con un mondo che cambia. E secondo me questa per noi è diventata una sorta di autogiustificazione di un paese che vive un pesantissimo declino. No, negare il declino dell'Italia veramente vuol dire no? Non avere la capacità di guardarsi allo specchio. E abbiamo in un certo senso reagito a questo declino, ma questo vale anche per altri paesi occidentali, cercando di spostare l'argomento della discussione. Beh, però possiamo arrangiarci, possiamo creare delle start-up, possiamo innovare. Guardate, no, l'esempio lo faceva ieri da Bozzo, secondo me. Cioè Airbnb, Alibaba, tutte queste robe sono delle imprese interessanti, ma dal punto di vista della ricaduta occupazionale impiegano zero.
Poche centinaia di persone.
Se noi immaginiamo un mondo nel quale tutto sarà basato esclusivamente sui servizi, è un mondo nel quale i salari sono bassi per una ragione molto semplice, ragazzi. Io non so quanto avete studiato di economia nella vostra vita, ma quando si viveva di industria c'era un incremento automatico della produttività. Vi faccio un esempio banale: se voi avete una catena di montaggio con le macchine e mettete più capitale, rendete la produzione delle macchine più rapide, quella capacità di produrre più macchine ricadeva automaticamente sui salari degli operai che la producevano. Se voi lavorate in un caffè, c'è un certo numero di caffè che potete fare in una giornata al netto dell'investimento. Allora un paese come l'Italia, che è un paese che ha una struttura economica molto squilibrata su servizi bassi, su servizi di base, è un paese che deve cercare di capire come creare di nuovo una filiera del valore che non sia per forza l'innovazione assoluta, ma che sia fare bene alcune cose che fanno parte del nostro DNA, del nostro essere paese. Per quello io condivido il turismo, ma anche la produzione agricola. Guardate, noi no, molto spesso enfatizziamo questa idea di turismo. La produzione agricola, per esempio, prendete tutto questo dibattito che c'è sulle aree spopolate. Io poi sono calabrese, no, ma anche qua avete aree come la Carnia, avete aree difficili, no? Ma il solo fatto di riportare, aiutare, sostenere delle popolazioni che ritornano e iniziano a riprendere delle coltivazioni è prima di tutto un modo di mantenere il territorio, ma in seguito può diventare una maniera di fare turismo. Io una cosa che non condivido sul turismo è questa idea, il turismo ci salverà. No, sicuramente, ma noi dobbiamo creare le precondizioni di difesa del territorio. Cioè il più grande valore che abbiamo in questo paese è la difesa del territorio. In Italia c'è un'alluvione ogni 10 giorni. Se voi prendete la popolazione dell'Italia, il 70% della popolazione vive sulle coste, ma le coste non sono più difese dalle colline. Allora se noi vogliamo fare turismo è un problema che dobbiamo porci. Allora se vogliamo declinare realmente il concetto di innovazione non è inventare cose nuove, ma è cercare di ragionare su modi che, date le finanze pubbliche che abbiamo, ci permettano di ripopolare queste aree, ci permettono di sostenere questi processi. E ci vuole dell'innovazione, ci vuole della capacità manageriale per creare dei progetti di ripopolamento collinare che poi sappiano creare turismo. Secondo me uno dei grandi problemi che abbiamo è proprio che noi non siamo capaci. Noi abbiamo non solo uno Stato che non funziona, ma abbiamo anche
nella maggior parte dei casi una classe imprenditoriale assolutamente ancorata a un mondo vecchio che non si è mai aperta. Siamo un paese che non è capace di aprirsi verso gli altri, non è capace di internalizzare. Tuca prima faceva l'esempio di queste iniziative in cui portano 50 imprenditori, no, da fuori per creare innovazione. In Italia è difficile immaginare cose di questo genere, ma sarebbe proprio su idee semplici di questo genere che dovremmo interrogarci, no? Che dovremmo cercare di aprirci. Non so cosa ne pensate di questo, cioè come la vedete voi che dovete farle queste cose, che siete il tessuto sociale di questo paese.
Siete i post-millennials.
Millennials, sì. Anche perché noi siamo chiaramente un'età di un'età fallimentare, no?
Rovinati.
Un'altra cosa interessante è guardare la differenza di prospettive che c'è fra la gente della nostra età, fra i trentenni, e le persone molto più giovani che oggi hanno 16-17 anni, nelle quali si nota molta più assunzione della realtà che da parte nostra. Noi abbiamo delle aspettative molto più alte, mentre i giovani sono molto più disillusi per molti aspetti, ma non solo disillusi in senso negativo, sono anche consci del fatto che saranno più poveri dei loro genitori, mentre la nostra generazione, Francesco, aveva ancora l'aspirazione, era ancora cresciuta nell'idea, cioè voglio dire, chi ha 16 anni oggi, no, la crisi è stata cominciata nel 2008-2009, comunque vive e cresce in un ambiente diverso da quello nel quale siamo cresciuti noi. Io non so cosa ne pensate di questo.
Parliamo del vostro sconforto, apritevi. Teniamoci per mano mentre lo facciamo. Tutti contenti, felici, ottimisti?
Cioè, come vedete il vostro futuro? Come vedete? Cioè, cosa volete fare dopo i 18 anni? Quali sono le vostre idee?
Che sia legale, parlate di cose legali. Sì. Si parte dal titolo di studio. O se c'era qualcosa che vorreste chiarire quando ritornerà a Tucca, pensateci, perché lui ci ha offerto tanti stimoli, però secondo me alcuni di quei punti forse meriterebbero un po' più di scavo, a partire proprio dal titolo, dal concetto fondamentale della sua presentazione, cioè imprenditoria giovanile, forma di partecipazione democratica. Se proviamo a dare un po' più di contenuto a questo, secondo me non sarebbe male, però per questo aspettiamo il relatore.
Visto che i giovani non dicono niente, no, mi viene da chiedermi anche queste forme di partecipazione, di imprenditoria innovativa, insomma, di cui parla il professor Tucca, cognome pronunciabile, lascio perdere, non rischiano di essere un modo di continuare in un processo di ricercarsi semplicemente una nicchia. Partendo dai like di Facebook o da change.org, no? Ho l'illusione di partecipare, di essere in qualche modo al centro della scena, facendo delle cose con influenza minima e che anche mi impegnano molto poco, no?
Certo.
Tendenzialmente l'impegno poi porta anche a dei risultati, però. E queste nuove forme, adesso estremizzo, perché ovviamente non è che sarà, non è naturalmente che penso sia tutto così, queste nuove forme di imprenditoria che si rivolgono a una nicchia, che si autogenerano, non rischiano di essere una continuazione, un modo per continuare a stare in una nicchia e non affrontare, diciamo, quello che è il palcoscenico della società, del sistema, della società più concreta. Non rischiamo di creare un'illusione di poter restare ai margini e cambiare facendo tutto sommato molto poco, e invece così si rischia poi di subire la società, oppure i Google, insomma, diciamo, le altre entità che si stanno configurando come delle potenze.
I'm going to briefly translate the last question. Can it be a paradoxical effect about online activism? Meaning, you, in a sense, create your own small space in your online community without really having an impact on the wider system. Like, you do your petition on change.org, you follow this or that group on Facebook, but what about your real impact into the real world? that was the last one. Then we have to go back to the previous question.
I try to address that very quickly. And I'm not a specialist of online activism, but I'm interested in it. And I think we are getting more demanding and more interested in the impact of that. We, meaning media and academics and students, so we care more about impact. And I think that's very healthy. So we begin to ask, what is the impact? So I think that kind of more demanding, strict attitude is good. That we have to explore it, and partly it's an empirical issue as well. Partly it's about empirical research. Can we go and follow that? But one thing that I wanted to say in response to your question was that we live in a strange time, at a strange time when it's easier to buy things on Amazon than it is to sort of participate in debate or in changing things in society. So Amazon is one click and you buy, I don't know, a new TV or music or books or whatever you want to buy. So in some ways that makes consumption and ignorance very easy. But in a way the challenge for activists or people who develop these systems is to make participation also very easy. But how to make it easy and effective, I think that's the Holy Grail.
Can you please remind us the two questions you just...
The last one, or the second one was, do you really think we need a helping hand to ease our creativity, no? Also economically, because we always fall into that discussion again. So do we need 1,000 euros per month, let me simplify, no? So we can do whatever we want to do, so we can participate in the world? Or do we actually need the challenge, and at some point we will have to rise up to that challenge? And so what is the mix?
I think things like basic income that I believe Guy Standing will talk about tomorrow, others will talk about it. I think that has to be part of the debate. That's one ingredient we have, or one option we can talk about. We can re-innovate with that. Personally, I believe that basic income may be a very good thing if you combine it with communities, if you combine it with these very magnetic, engaging, and exciting communities. Because if you just give people money, they might get very passive at first. So you also need some kind of pull factor to make life more interesting and fun and participation easier. So I guess that's my main response. I might come up with something else. Well, you talked about the economy as a problem.
Is economy just a tool now and not a solution for the rest of our problems like it used to be maybe for our parents? I mean, like finding a job was a solution. You were settled.
Yeah.
Eri a posto dopo che hai trovato un posto di lavoro.
Yeah.
And now, not only is it's not possible, we want to do more than that. So is it just a tool now and not a solution anymore?
Yeah, well, I guess that's a healthy view that economy, in the sense that we define it now, it should be a tool, right, for human goals, for human ends, for happiness, right? And I think there might be some economists in the room, but and I think there are, everybody here is interested in these topics, but there are some economists who view the economy as sacred, as a religion.
Yeah.
So I would like you to have the courage to say that economists are not really specialists of the world. They only know about a narrow range of institutions and indicators. So when economists talk, then just try to put them in a little bit of a narrower space. They do not know about human happiness. They do not know often about sustainability. Some of them do, but they don't have all the answers. That's all I want to say. And a healthy perspective, for me at least, one perspective that I enjoy is asking whether that promotes human happiness and thriving and flourishing and prosperity. So economy should be kind of demoted in a way. Demoted, put it in its place. It's not everything. And we have to remix it to suit our purposes. That's what I would say. Okay. Okay, little question here.
Vabbè, stiamo tutti bene.
No, volevo un attimo fare un intervento un po' provocatorio su quello che ci siamo detti prima in assenza del professor Tucca. Quello che un po' non condivido è questa visione negativa secondo la quale la generazione post-millennials, di cui invece io faccio parte, non avrà il futuro o la condizione economica che hanno avuto i nostri genitori. E secondo me non è così, nel senso, mediamente il livello di welfare medio sarà sicuramente più basso rispetto ai nostri genitori, però visto che qui il tema di oggi era anche l'imprenditoria, io credo che un giovane di quelli presenti qui in sala avrà sicuramente le opportunità anche qui in una realtà piccola, non necessariamente in una realtà più grande, di sviluppare una sua idea e di diventare imprenditore di se stesso e rendersi autonomo, chiaramente cambiando i paradigmi che abbiamo avuto fino ad oggi. È chiaro che se crediamo ancora scusate la provocazione, al posto fisso alla Zalone, è chiaro che non andremo da nessuna parte. Se invece ci rimbocchiamo le maniche, anziché aspettare interventi dallo Stato che appunto non ha i soldi per finanziare i giovani ma finanzia altre attività, ma da soli, senza contributi di nessuno, ci mettiamo a fare qualcosa, lo possiamo fare. Ce ne sono un sacco di esempi, e non di start-up, di persone che nel loro piccolo, senza avere l'azienda di famiglia, senza avere nulla, riescono con tante difficoltà, con tante ore al giorno di impegno, ma secondo me il messaggio che dobbiamo passare è che si può fare, non è impossibile. Io lo faccio, non ho un'azienda di famiglia, ho iniziato a 24 anni, quindi si può fare, non è impossibile.
No, absolutely. I think it's wonderful to talk about the diversity of options, right? So certainly startups and entrepreneurship is not the only way. It may be a powerful way, though, to remix and change and recombine economic ideas and then to project it. So maybe that's why I talked about it a lot today, especially in London, which is such a sort of knowledge-intensive city, very communicative city, very media-led city. So in a way, if you want to have a wider impact, whatever you do, maybe you have a family farm and you're doing innovative things there and you're carrying on traditions and adding something new, if you want to spread that model, then you have to explain it to the media. You have to explain it more broadly. Maybe that's why I talked a lot about entrepreneurs, because they often are good with the media. They're very close to these newspapers. So it becomes a global conversation. What would be nice would be for these various other people to also participate in the conversation and to not just for entrepreneurs to dominate that, but I think wonderful points again. And I'd love to get one question, if possible, from this side of the room. Can we get one from this side of the room?
You, on the top. Okay, first. And hopefully a question from this side of the room. So please invent something.
I'd like to know your point of view. Do you think the youth unemployed will be increased in the next year?
That's the kind of question that an economist might be better at answering than me. So I'm a sociologist. I don't really follow the exact economic ups and downs all the time. But again, probably there's going to be much more instability. And what I can tell you, or what I believe in, is that this model will not eradicate youth unemployment. So for me, the bigger question is, how do we completely eradicate youth unemployment? That's a fascinating question. So unemployment may go up and down a little bit. I think there'll be fluctuations. Maybe it will get a little bit worse over time. But the interesting question is, what kind of new system can we build that will eradicate and stop youth unemployment? That would be very interesting for me. But thanks for that question. Thank you.
Do we have more questions? Yeah, left side of the room.
You're warming up.
Finally.
You're warming up. Yeah.
Intanto buongiorno, La ringrazio di essere qui perché grazie a lei ho saltato la verifica di 3 ore di italiano.
He's saying thanks to you.
Oh, okay. That's always the best thing about these events, yeah.
Sono stato un po' a trovare una domanda perché comunque sia non sono un esperto. Nel suo discorso lei ha valorizzato queste 3 parole, innovazione, semplicità e giovani. Facendo una ricerca adesso ho trovato che negli anni 30 venne fatta una definizione di imprenditore come motore dell'innovazione, del cambiamento, capace di rompere le strutture e gli schemi. Dopo tutti questi anni noi siamo ancora qui a cercare questa innovazione. Quindi se dovessi fare una metafora potrei dire che l'innovazione è la benzina e non avendola abbiamo un motore senza benzina. Secondo lei non sarebbe invece più facile valorizzare le cose che abbiamo già invece di cercare qualcosa di nuovo?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And in a way, when you say that we should reuse what we already have, that's innovation too. That's repurposing, right? What you have. In some ways, even though I don't advocate Airbnb as such, but that's one well-known example of saying that we have these houses and flats. How about we use them in a different way? And if we have free rooms, open rooms, unused rooms, let's let tourists use them, or let's let them to students. Let's let students to use them for a while. So you can use digital technologies to make use of what you already have. But that's also an innovation, a type of social innovation that's not as difficult as innovating an iPhone. It's not technologically as complex, but it can be very good, very beneficial, and very motivating, and socially also very positive. So I think all of what you say is right. And sometimes, obviously, the innovation isn't good or bad per se, right? This is a debate that's now happening in London more and more, that we have the courage to say that innovation isn't always good. Oftentimes it's really destructive. And one part of that links to consumerism that you talked about, that we have this hunger for new things. We have to rise above that and say, do we always want new shoes or new ties or new dresses, or is there another way to satisfy our desire for new things? So maybe we have to innovate to a different direction, not the kind of superficial way in which we've innovated until now. So yeah, innovation can be good, bad, or something else. Thank you.
Other questions?
So I'm gonna try to talk English.
Nice.
In my opinion, you talked a lot about basically young people with a lot of ideas. But what you suggest to young people that is good at something, but it doesn't have ideas to start an enterprise, and it also can't, it doesn't have any means to find work here in Italy.
What if you're not a bright potential entrepreneur?
What's
left for you?
Very, very big, important question for so many young people. And personally, when I was 19, I left Finland. I think partly because I felt there were no meaningful opportunities for me at that time. I wanted to see the world and so forth. So obviously, Italian young people are lucky to be part of the EU, right? So it's very easy to travel. Whereas if you are from, let's say, China or maybe South America, it's much more difficult to do that. So that's always an option, I suppose. I don't have all the answers, but one thing that a lot of sociologists say, especially in the UK and in Japan, is that even though you may be shy, you should be part of many networks. so that's sort of, I understand that's difficult sometimes. It's not so easy, but a lot of sociologists say that this is a network society. So things move quickly, change quickly, and opportunities come and go. The way to find those opportunities is through these new networks, online and offline, and so forth. But yeah, again, no perfect solutions because the pool of jobs is limited. So I think that's the starting bit. That was the way I started today, to say that actually unemployment is going up. But having a lot of friends and maybe having friends with new ideas and startups can be one way to get involved in that and developing different skills again. That's what OECD always says, is that develop new skills. I partly believe in that. Well, yeah, we should talk about this more afterwards, but it is a difficult dilemma. Yes, thank you.
Other questions?
Or
Last chance.
would anybody like to answer his question?
Oh,
Say,
yeah.
Or this is how you find a job. Anybody who's maybe 18 or 22 or somebody who's found a job recently, do you have any lessons to share about how you have found a job? What you should do to find a job? Any wise words or experiences?
Yeah, they're too young, maybe.
You have a point on that?
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Secondo me il lavoro del futuro sarà quello dello smaltimento dei rifiuti tecnologici.
Oh yeah, okay, that's an interesting idea. That makes sense. Yeah, that's not the question.
Oh, okay.
Oh.
Okay.
I can comment on that, and so that sounds like a useful piece of advice here and now for us here and now, and I certainly agree that we have to find smarter ways to recycle, and we have something called Zen Robotics in Finland that uses artificial intelligence to sort through garbage very well. So that again changes the picture a bit. You know, even recycling could shift in the next 5 years. We might use artificial intelligence. So therefore, in order to be in recycling, you have to have computer skills. Or if artificial intelligence does it, we will not employ anyone. We will employ a very small group of people. So in a way, I appreciate that suggestion is good, but it also points to some very complicated changes. So it's hard to predict, and that may be the most disturbing thing to realize, is that whatever you think will be the growth industry, it may not be a growth industry in 5 or 10 years. So again, maybe that's something for the next session to talk about. And so that's why it's so difficult to make predictions, and that's why networks are useful, because you can be connected to 2 or 3 different industries. And it's good to have different skills. If you're lucky, you have 2 or 3 very strong skills, so that you can move. You learn recycling, and you maybe learn something more about IT, and you go to a different country or whatever, you have language skills. So that sort of, those kind of multi-skilled people are able to move around much more. So I suppose that's the best piece of advice that I would have, inspired by your comment. So reality is complex, it's good to have many skills. That's what I would say.
Any final question? Because we're running out of time, okay?
Premesso che secondo me l'autoarrangiarsi non funziona molto, perché comunque in Italia abbiamo oltre 2 milioni di NEET e la situazione è molto complicata per noi giovani, non riusciamo veramente a arrangiarci. E soprattutto per quanto riguarda le politiche pubbliche abbiamo visto che i finanziamenti in favore dei giovani, le istituzioni pubbliche sono sempre di meno, se bastano passare gli anni, abbiamo avuto tagli enormi. La mia domanda è la seguente: che ruolo può avere lo Stato delle politiche pubbliche per dare a tutti delle possibilità riguardo all'innovazione? Come può uno Stato garantire anche a chi non ha papà o mamma che gli garantiscono di poter aprire una start-up super bella con finanziamenti importanti? Come può lo Stato garantire tutto questo a tutti i giovani, indipendentemente dalla condizione familiare di provenienza?
A very, I think, question of great political importance, and a question that's important to individuals' welfare and well-being. As I said in the beginning of my talk, entrepreneurship will not be a solution to everybody, or it will not help everyone, unfortunately. So it cannot be the whole solution. And I think this whole week, if you come to other sessions, you'll see that there are many solutions we have to combine in some ways. And I think that could be the best outcome of this whole conference, that we learn to combine different things. I'm sure there are things you can do at the local level in Udine with services and communities that can help unemployed youth to start thinking about their options. But also one thing I'd like you to do, because this week, I assume, is also about imagination. We also have to imagine some things that are not existing and that we cannot do tomorrow. We cannot do them next year. We might be able to do them 5 years later or 10 years later. So I would like to ask you to imagine a society with zero unemployment. What would that require and what would that look like? And if you can imagine that, then you might get an idea for a policy or a solution or a startup later. What would we have to do to have a radically different setup where no young person is wasted or their talents are no longer wasted? So let us keep imagining about those solutions. Thank you.
Yeah, so guys, we have to close down. Thanks a lot for your participation. Just two quick things. If we want an answer for your question, another answer might come tomorrow morning at the talk of guys standing. I think it would be very good to come. And today at 3:30, if you are around, we have another interesting meetings again about a development of industrial policy. Ma perché? Posso parlare in italiano, scusate, oggi pomeriggio alle 3:30 abbiamo un incontro molto interessante di discussione sulle politiche industriali che complementano alcune delle cose che abbiamo detto oggi, e domani mattina parleremo moltissimo di precariato del lavoro e di politiche pubbliche e di altri temi. Quindi se siete interessati, il dibattito non finisce ma continua con prospettive diverse. Grazie ancora.
Thanks very much for the participation.